The rusting maw of Blackwood Creek. The summer I turned 16, my parents, in their infinite wisdom and a desperate attempt to curb my burgeoning obsession with online gaming, shipped me off to my grandparents' house. Not their charming suburban bungalow, mind you, but their other house. Its official name, according to a faded, peeling sign half swallowed by weeds, was the Blackwood Creek Textile Mill. But to the local kids it was simply the mill, or more ominously, the rusting maw. It was a sprawling complex of brick and corrugated iron, its windows shattered like vacant eyes, its colossal smokestack leaning precariously against the bruised summer sky. Local legend, whispered by Alex with an exaggerated theatricality that still sent shivers down Ben's spine, claimed the mill had closed abruptly decades ago after a series of unfortunate incidents, mysterious accidents, sudden illnesses, and a pervasive sense of unease that drove the workers away. My grandparents, when I'd innocently brought it up, had exchanged a glance and quickly changed the subject. "Nothing but an old ruin, dear," my grandmother had said, her voice unusually firm. "Stay away from it." Naturally, that made it our prime target. The first hint of something amiss wasn't a grand, terrifying spectacle, but a subtle shift in the everyday once we started venturing near the factory. It began with the smell. It started subtly, as these things always do, like a barely perceptible tremor in the familiar summer air. As we approached the rusted chain-link fence that marked the factory's perimeter, a faint rhythmic humming began to manifest. It wasn't the distant drone of cicadas or the natural buzz of insects. This was deeper, resonating in the very air, a low, constant vibration that seemed to make my teeth ache, a faint pressure behind my eyes. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, enveloping us. Alex, ever the skeptic, wrinkled his nose. "Smells like damp concrete and something sweet, like rotting flowers." He was right. A faint, cloying sweetness permeated the air around the factory, like lilies left too long in stagnant water, but with an underlying metallic tang, like old blood and rust. It was a smell that spoke of decay and something ancient, utterly out of place in the pristine summer air. We dismissed it as typical industrial decay, the stench of stagnant water and mold. But the hum persisted, a constant underlying rhythm beneath the occasional creak of the old building in the wind. Then came the cold spots, the one in Blackwood Creek. Blackwood Creek wasn't a town so much as a forgotten whisper on the map of rural Pennsylvania, a skeletal finger of a highway long since bypassed by the interstate, curled through a valley choked with ancient, oppressive forest. Patches of air around the perimeter of the factory, particularly near the loading docks and shattered windows, that would suddenly drop several degrees, chilling us to the bone even on a sweltering July afternoon. The hairs on my arms would prickle, a sensation that made me glance around nervously. Chloe would rub her arms, shivering. Ben would cling closer to Alex. We blamed localized drafts, a quirk of the abandoned structure. But an unsettling sense of an unseen presence began to take root, a feeling of being watched. A pervasive cold gaze emanating from the dark, vacant windows of the mill. The first truly unsettling incident involved our belongings. We had found a partially intact old wagon near the main entrance, rusted but still capable of holding some weight. We planned to use it to collect interesting bits of scrap metal we imagined we'd find inside. We had left our backpacks in it filled with water bottles, snacks, and Chloe's camera. After a quick scout of the perimeter, we returned to find Chloe's camera, which she'd carefully placed in the main compartment, subtly rearranged. Not stolen, not even damaged, just shifted. It was resting perfectly, inexplicably, on top of an old rusted cog lying nearby, an object we hadn't even noticed before. Chloe swore she'd never placed it there. We dismissed it as a prank by some other kids, though we were fairly certain we were the only ones who dared venture this deep into the woods. But a small seed of unease was planted. We tried to rationalize it. The wind, the settling of the old building, our own imaginations playing tricks in the eerie atmosphere. But the feeling of being watched, the persistent chill emanating from the factory's dark interior, was harder to dismiss. I found myself unconsciously averting my gaze from the larger, darker windows, as if avoiding an unblinking eye. I started keeping the small, sturdy multi-tool my dad had given me, its largest blade locked open, tucked into my back pocket, its hilt warm against my hand. Not for cutting rope or opening cans, but for something else, something I couldn't name. One night, around 0300 hours, unable to sleep in my grandparents' suffocatingly silent farmhouse, I crept out onto the porch. The air was heavy, the silence absolute. Then I heard it. My grandparents, bless their stubborn hearts, had inherited a small, weathered farmhouse there from a distant relative, a place they frequented only for a week or two each summer, mostly to tend to the sprawling, untamed garden. A faint, almost subliminal whisper. It was too soft to discern words, but it seemed to emanate from the direction of the mill, a sighing, mournful sound like wind through deep chasms, but with an underlying cadence that felt strangely human. I froze, listening intently. Just the oppressive stillness. I dismissed it as echoes, a trick of the acoustics in the vast, empty valley, or sheer exhaustion. But my sleep grew restless. The anomalies escalated, subtle yet persistent, gnawing at my rigid, logical framework. The rhythmic humming intensified, now occasionally accompanied by a high-pitched whine that made my ears ache, as if something vast and ancient was slowly rousing within the decaying factory. The cold spots intensified, now accompanied by the faint, cloying sweetness like lilies left too long in stagnant water, and the distinct metallic tang. The smell would suddenly fill the air around us, so potent it made our eyes water before dissipating. It was a smell that spoke of decay and something ancient, utterly out of place in the summer air. The whispers grew louder, clearer. They were no longer indistinct murmurs. They were voices, direct, personal, calling out fragmented phrases in what sounded like Old English, sometimes even a strange guttural dialect I couldn't place, forgotten by time, but the tone was clear, pleading, despairing, sometimes angry, and occasionally a word or two in a chillingly precise, accented tone. Cold, below, lost, find us, sleep with us. Yes, I heard a child's soft sob, a woman's desperate plea, a man's guttural gasp, always seeming to emanate from within the factory, drawing closer, urging us on. We'd huddle together, our hearts hammering, straining our ears, but they would always fade, replaced by the omnipresent, heavy silence. I started seeing fleeting shadow figures in the corners of my vision, coalescing for a split second into familiar forms. A small, thin child, a grieving woman in tattered work clothes, an old man with hollow eyes, their forms flickering in the periphery of my vision, before dissolving back into the darkness. My own reflection in Chloe's camera lens, when I glance at it, seemed to distort, my features twisting into a fleeting grimace, a look of utter despair before normalizing. It was preying on my mind, twisting my thoughts, trying to isolate me, even from my friends. The house itself was a relic, perpetually smelling of dust, mothballs, and something faintly metallic that I could never quite place. I developed a slight tremor in my hands, barely noticeable but present. I stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping soundly. My logical mind, my anchor, was slipping. I found myself muttering arguments against an unseen presence, then immediately regretting it, retreating further into myself. Alex, though clearly unsettled, tried to maintain his bravado. Chloe started taking more pictures, a desperate attempt to capture proof, to make sense of it. Ben was a wreck, clinging to us, his eyes perpetually wide with terror. The entity, whatever it was, knew. It was nurturing our despair, cultivating our isolation. I began to research Blackwood Creek's history. My grandparents, despite their reticence, had a dusty old box of local newspaper clippings in the attic. Hidden among mundane announcements and recipes, I found it. Articles dating back to the early 1900s. The Blackwood Creek textile mill wasn't just a textile mill. It had started as a small, prosperous logging operation, then diversified into textiles. But its history was stained with tragedy, not just accidents. The mill had been built over what was once a series of small, unregulated coal mines, operated by a ruthless company that exploited immigrant families, including children. There were accounts of cave-ins, lung disease, and unspeakable working conditions. And then the unfortunate incidents. Not just accidents, but a string of inexplicable suicides. 3 in total within a 6-month period, all occurring within the factory walls. A young woman, an old man, and most chillingly, a child, all found hanging in different sections of the mill. The official reports cited melancholy and despair as the causes, but the whispers among the locals at the time spoke of something darker, something possessing the mill. The company quickly shut down, abandoning the property, its history neatly buried. A chill ran down my spine. The children's sobs, the women's pleas, the cold spots, the scent of lilies in decay, the hum, the suicides, it was all converging. We stood at the rusted gate of the factory, knowing that within its decaying shell something was waiting. We felt the sudden, overwhelming urge to understand, to push through the fear, to confront whatever lay beneath, to force it to reveal itself. We felt a desperate need to understand. One particularly oppressive, humid afternoon, with a storm brewing on the horizon, the oppressive silence around the factory was absolute. Not even the chirping of cicadas. The air grew thick with the cloying sweetness. The scent of lilies and damp earth intensified, almost suffocating. Its porch sagged, its paint peeled, and the nearest real town was a 45-minute drive, boasting a single gas station and a general store that smelled faintly of desperation and stale candy. I arrived, a surly, phone-addicted teenager expecting 2 months of excruciating boredom. The metallic tang, like blood, was overwhelming. The rhythmic thumping from within the factory became a frantic, desperate hammering, a sound of agony and effort. The whispers intensified, a cacophony, a swirling vortex of voices, all of them ours, all our anxieties, all our doubts, all the faces we'd lost. And then, from the depths of the hum, a clear, distinct sound, a child's laugh, playful, innocent, yet utterly chilling, followed by that guttural chuckle, now louder, more confident. We stood frozen outside the main entrance, our flashlights cutting trembling arcs through the gloom of the storm clouds. Ben was openly weeping. Chloe's camera was clutched to her chest, her knuckles white. Alex, for the first time, looked truly terrified. We felt the cold spots swirling around us, coalescing, forming indistinct shapes that pressed in on us from every side. And then, slowly, deliberately, we saw it. The massive rusted steel doors of the main entrance, jammed shut for decades, began to groan. Not the creak of old metal in the wind, but a deep, resonant sound of ancient mechanisms grinding to life. Slowly, agonizingly, they began to part, revealing a sliver of profound, inky blackness behind them. A faint, unearthly blue light began to emanate from the depths of this opening, illuminating the factory's interior in an ethereal glow. We gasped, our breaths catching in our throats, but our eyes were drawn, transfixed to the abyss within. The interior was not just a ruined factory floor. Instead, within its depths, a scene was unfolding. Not a void, but a glimpse into something else. We saw vast, impossibly deep, claustrophobic network of narrow tunnels and cramped shafts twisting and turning beneath the factory, extending into the very earth. The air in this hidden world shimmered with a viscous, dark liquid that pulsed with the same blue light. And within this liquid, hundreds, thousands, millions of faint ethereal forms drifted silently. They were transparent, barely visible, but unmistakable. Miners in old caps, textile workers in tattered clothes, men, women, children, their outlines wavering like smoke. The lost souls of Blackwood Creek and countless others, all lost, all suspended. They floated aimlessly, their faces blank, their eyes like twin voids. But Blackwood Creek, despite its somnolent facade, held a darker, more compelling allure for a restless mind. My grandparents, bless them, were too absorbed in their gardening and their nightly card games to notice my furtive expeditions beyond the farm's crumbling fences. And then, in the very center of the vast, pulsating ocean of souls, bathed in the unearthly blue light that now emanated from the factory's every shattered window and open doorway, a shimmering distortion like heat haze, forming a vague bipedal figure, impossibly tall, impossibly thin, its limbs too long, its head too small. Its skin seemed to ripple like water under moonlight, and its face, it was a shifting mosaic of shadows and light, features coalescing and dissolving, but we saw the eyes. Not eyes, but two swirling vortices of darkest black, reflecting the dim glow of the scene with an unnatural, hungry gleam. This was the Collector, not a ghost, but something far more ancient, something that fed on the echoes of pain, on fear, on the fractured souls of the lost. It was the collective anguish of all those lost souls, trapped and assimilated, forming a singular hungry entity, the very lifeblood of the factory itself, and perhaps the very ground beneath Blackwood Creek. The creature reached out, its impossibly long, slender fingers hovering over one of the ethereal figures of a small child, drifting nearby, its form already beginning to waver. It didn't touch, it merely beckoned. The voices in my mind coalesced, a chorus now, 1,000 alien thoughts, 1,000,000 human fears, all merging, all vying for dominance. They wanted to rest. We offered peace, understanding, freedom. Join us, Liam. Rest forever in the dark, like them. I watched in horror as the creature in the abyss seemed to inhale a subtle, sucking motion. The ethereal figure of the child wavered, its outline shimmering before it slowly, inexorably began to drift towards the creature, its form becoming translucent, merging with the swirling darkness of the void where its mouth should be. It didn't struggle. It simply dissolved, a look of placid resignation on its face. Then another figure, an old woman, then a man, all drawn into the shimmering void. The factory was a silent maw, consuming them. The blue light from the creature pulsed, then intensified, becoming a blinding, invasive blue that seemed to burrow into my very being. I felt cold, so cold. And then a tearing sensation, not physical but profound, as if something was being gently, meticulously peeled from my core. My only companions in this rural exile were a trio of local kids I grudgingly befriended. Alex, the fearless leader with a knack for navigating the overgrown trails. Chloe, the quiet observer who carried a worn camera everywhere. And Ben, the nervous one whose perpetually wide eyes seemed to see shadows even in broad daylight. I heard my own scream, distant, muffled, then fading into the terrifying alien hum. Ben, suddenly finding a desperate primal strength, screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure terror that seemed to momentarily shatter the oppressive atmosphere. He grabbed Alex and Chloe, pulling them away from the opening doors. "Run! Just run!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. They stumbled backward, away from the glowing doorway, away from the hungry factory. I found my legs moving, pushing me, away, away. We ran, blindly falling, scrambling through the overgrown path, driven by a terror so profound it eclipsed all reason. We didn't stop until we collapsed, gasping for breath, miles away, back on the familiar, normal road leading to my grandparents' house. The blue light, the shimmering forms, the creature, it was gone. Only the cold remained. We never spoke of it again, not really. Not to each other, not to our parents, certainly not to my grandparents. How could we? Who would believe us? They'd just say it was teenage imagination, overactive minds fueled by ghost stories in a dilapidated building. Alex retreated into himself, his boisterous confidence replaced by a quiet, watchful demeanor. He rarely smiled, his eyes always scanning the periphery, as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. Chloe stopped taking pictures. Her camera, a symbol of her desire to capture reality, was put away, unused. Ben, the nervous one, became practically agoraphobic, refusing to leave his house for weeks, haunted by nightmares he couldn't articulate. I went back home, back to my parents' suburban house, back to my games, but nothing was the same. The thrill was gone. The bright screen seemed dull. The virtual world strangely flat. I avoided silence. I left the television on, always, a low hum of white noise to drown out the others. I checked my reflection endlessly, scrutinizing my own face, half expecting it to distort, to show the void. I refused to acknowledge any sound that resembled a hum or a whisper from behind walls. I tell myself it was mass hysteria, shared hallucination, the sheer exhaustion of exploration, the isolation of Blackwood Creek, the stress of modern life finally catching up to me and my friends. I repeat it like a mantra, a fragile shield against the terrifying truth. I cling to logic, to reason, but the shield is riddled with holes. From that day, I still remain thinking about it. I feel the faint, inexplicable cold spots, even in the warmth of summer. We were the typical summer gang, bound by the universal teenage quest for adventure and the thrill of the forbidden. The forbidden, in Blackwood Creek, invariably led to the old factory. I sometimes catch the cloying sweet scent of lilies and damp earth on a breeze, or in the stillness of the night, the metallic tang, like old rust and something more. I hear faint whispers just on the edge of hearing, calling my name, promising me oblivion, echoing the ancient voices, the cries of the lost. I scrutinize the faces of strangers, the expressions of friends, looking for that subtle distortion, that unnatural stillness in their eyes, that hint of ancient knowledge. I know it's still there, deep within the Olympic National Forest, in that abandoned factory, slumbering, waiting. And I know with a horrifying certainty that it carried a piece of me with it, a resonance that was forever altered, forever open to its cold, unblinking gaze. I escaped the factory, but I did not escape the entity. I am safe for now. I am forever haunted by the chilling knowledge that beneath the familiar veneer of our world, ancient, hungry things lie dormant, or perhaps actively pursue, waiting for the curious, waiting for the isolated, waiting for the fear, forever ensuring that some absences, once experienced, can never truly be filled, and I will always wonder what stories it now whispers from the rusting iron, what souls it now assimilates, and if one day the factory's maw will truly awaken and its vast, hungry void will open once more, inviting me to join the forgotten in their endless, silent rest. The factory stood like a decaying monument to a forgotten industry, a mile or so beyond the last dilapidated houses of the town, nestled deep in a hollow carved out by a sluggish, dark creek. Thanks for watching. The veil between our world and theirs is thinner than you think. Each like, each share, each subscription strengthens the connection. Feed the channel before it feeds on you.